Okay, so parallel lines and vertical lines, okay? That's what we're gonna talk about. These are vertical angles, okay? Vertical angles are angles that are across from each other, okay? So that means that they are congruent, and congruent mean the same. So angle 2 and angle 4 are vertical angles. They have the same measurements, okay? However, angle 1 and angle 3, even though they are vertical to each other, and they are congruent to each other, but they're not congruent to the other two, okay? So angle 1 and angle 3 are vertical angles, which are congruent to each other, and angle 2 and angle 4 are a pair of vertical angles that are congruent to each other, okay? So angles 1 and angle 3, right? And angle 2 and angle 4 are pairs. Okay, so if they are a pair, if they're vertical, then that means they are congruent. So these are linear pairs. Linear pairs are adjacent angles, which is, you know, they are next to each other, formed by intersecting lines. Okay, so angle A and angle C are linear pair, because if I add those two angles together, they will equal 180. Angle C and angle B are linear pair, because if I add these two angles, they will equal 180. Name two other pairs of angles that are linear pair. Would be B and D, right? And guess the last one would be A and D. Okay. If I create a circle, it will give me 360 degrees, right? If I only take two of those that are adjacent, they're going to equal 180, right? So it doesn't matter which side I'm taking them from, I can make 180. So linear pairs. A linear pair of angles is supplementary. The sum of their angles, it will equal 180. If the measure of angle is A is 40, right? Hang on. If the measure of angle A is 40, what is the measure of angle C? Well, when you get to this type of questions, you want to create an equation, okay? It is pretty much subtracting 40 from 180, but you want to create the equation just because what would happen if they give you an expression rather than an actual measurement, right? So you would say that 40 plus x, which x would be the missing value, right, equals 180. Then you will take 40 from both sides, subtracting them because we are doing the opposite of the inverse operation, which is subtraction. And that would give you a zero pair. So x will equal 140, right? And that's what you will label it as, 140. So if I add 40 plus 140, it would give me 180, right? Which that is what supplementary means. Supplementary angles equal 180 degrees. Now we're going to move to parallel lines and transversal. So L and M are parallel to each other, right? If you notice that I moved angle 1, 2, 3, and 4 to the bottom, right? And they are congruent to the respective numbers, which in this case, 1 and 5 are congruent, 6 and 2 are congruent, 8 and 4 are congruent, and 3 and 7 are congruent, okay? But you can also say the 4 and 5 are congruent because they are vertical angles, and vertical angles have the same measurements because they are congruent. Okay, so what do you notice about the angles? Okay, the four angles formed by L and A are congruent to the four angles formed by A and M. Okay, so that's the previous slide where I moved 1, 2, 3, and 4 to the bottom, and they were congruent to 5, 6, 7, and 8, right? So if the measure of angle 1 is 40, what is the measure of all the other angles? Well, if you remember from the previous slide, right, we solved for x, which was 140. So those two angles, angle 1 is 40, angle 2 is 140. Well, remember we talked about vertical angles. So if 1 is 40, then that means that 4 is going to be 40, right? And so if 4 is also 40 because it's across from it, when I move 1, 2, 3, and 4 down, remember the 1 was congruent to 5. Therefore, 5 and 8 are also 40 degrees, which are congruent to angle 1, right? Now, if angle 2 is 140, well, 3 is going to be 140 because it is vertical to 2. Okay, so that means that 2, 3, 6, and 7 are going to also be 140. Okay. Now, this is what I was talking about. If they give you expressions, then if they give you something like the previous one, which it was 40, well, you can say that 180 minus 40 gives you 140, which is, you know, easy math. But once they give you expressions like this, you might want to actually write them down, okay, and equal them either to each other or equal them to 180, depending what the case is. In this case, they're asking you that if the measure of angle 1 is represented by 2x plus 5, you want to label that angle, right? And the measure of angle 4 is represented by 3x plus 5, then we label it as well. And notice I use the same ink because they are vertical, which means they are the same angle, right? They're supposed to be equal the same amount of degrees. So if it's asking you what is the actual measure of each angle, I don't want you to get confused from what we first saw at the beginning with the other slideshow. The other one, we were equaling it to 180 because we were talking about interior angles of a triangle, right? And here we're talking about transversal lines and parallel. So this is going to be a little bit different. So since these two angles are vertical, right, that means that they equal each other. So the way you want to approach this is by doing 2x plus 5 equals 3x minus 5. When you get to that point, you're going to just solve it like a two-step, two variables on both sides equation. Okay, so it would be 5, negative 5 on both sides, right? Which will then 0 pair on the left, and we'll put together on the right because they are the same sign. So negative 5 minus 5 will give you negative 10. 2x equals 3x minus 10. And then you will subtract 3x to both sides of the equation, which will 0 pair the 3x. And then it will leave you with negative x equals negative 10. At that point, what you need to do to make the x positive, because you can't have negative variables, you are going to divide both sides by negative 1, okay? Because remember that even though the x is by itself, the x still has a coefficient of 1. So you would say negative 1 on both sides. That will make your x positive, well, your solution, which will be 10, okay? Now, the way you find the actual angle measure for each angle, you're going to substitute, okay? So 2x plus 5 would be a substitution of 2 times 10 plus 5, right? Which gives you 25. And then you will do the same on the other one, which would be 3x minus 5. Substitute the x for the 10. So it would be 3 times 10 is 30 minus 5 is 25. Okay. So when you have vertical angles, remember they have to equal the same value. And if they don't, then something went wrong on you solving that equation. So you have to go back and check your equation.